Today's video is on the myth of negative emotion. I think the concept of negative emotion is pretty clear in the minds of most people, but hopefully by the end of this video, it's going to be pretty fuzzy, like this guy. Now, what's very interesting is that negative emotions in and of themselves are mental disorders. If you read any psychology textbook, something like anxiety or depression is considered a mental disorder, regardless of what the justification for the emotion is. The only thing they really look at is whether it's impeding your ability to work and function in society. Now that seems very strange. Misanthropy and negative emotions should not be a mental disorder. It depends entirely on why the person is feeling that emotion. A good example of where I would say depression is justified would be in a case like Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein repeatedly cheated on his wife, and not only did he cheat on her, but he forced her to be okay with him cheating on her. And then he complained about her being a very depressed and jealous person. Einstein's reasoning is clearly crazy, and his wife as having a totally reasonable reaction to what he is doing. But she is the one who is probably going to get diagnosed as crazy. Many people felt intense connection and positive emotions over the Nazi regime. People tend to just assume all negative emotions are irrational and that the only way somebody could get to a negative emotion is through an irrational path. But if the pathway they took to get there was logical, then you're basically just gaslighting and forcing them to accept insanity. Now, I think most reasonable people are going to agree that to a large extent, the institutions of mental health are pretty crazy. But I want to dive a lot deeper. Is what makes an emotion negative that it's undesirable to the host? The host does not desire to have this feeling. It is unpleasant. Or is a negative emotion a stress response and it causes physiological harm to the body? Is a negative emotion simply antisocial behavior? Is a negative emotion simply non-compliance with authority? Is the essence of a negative emotion any one of these specific things? Or is it a combination of several things on the list? Or is it things that I didn't add to the list and didn't think of? What's interesting is people do not agree on this. If you ask people what is the essence of a negative emotion, you will get different answers from different people. Now try this if you're bored sometime, but ask different people how they experience love. Ask them how they experience disgust. Ask them how they know they're bored. How do they know that they're feeling a particular emotion? And you're going to see that the answers vary quite a bit. Different people have totally different feelings they associate with an emotion. So if different people feel different things, is it quite possible that somebody can have what would be a painful feeling to what is considered a positive emotion? Or is it possible somebody could have a pleasurable feeling to what is considered a negative emotion? I think the answer is clearly a yes. I have a friend who likes to be startled. Oh! Seems very odd to me. Being startled is a very unpleasant experience to me. To him, is very pleasant. His friends and him, they just try to startle each other all night long. Is negative emotions the impacts that emotions have on others? Is a negative emotion one that causes the people around you to experience pain? If that is the definition of a negative emotion, then any emotion can be negative. Love is generally considered a positive emotion, but obviously if you love somebody who you're not married to and you're married, then love is very likely to hurt the people around you. Now, we can look at the stress responses and the physiology of emotions, and I think this is where you're going to start finding some more clear definitions. I don't think anyone can really argue that an emotion that accelerates aging or causes organ failure is going to be positive. I think that's where we can start finding some good evidence for what is a negative emotion. What I think a negative emotion really is it comes down to a couple different dimensions. It comes down to your quantity of life, your quality of life, and the quantity and quality of life of other people. Now, what I think makes an emotion clearly negative is when its overall effect is obviously detrimental. But this is where it gets confusing because negative emotions are often exchanges. Sometimes you're trading quality of life for quantity. Sometimes you're trading your quantity and quality of life to drastically improve the quantity and quality of life of others around you. Does that make an emotion negative? Some of the most altruistic people I've met are very, very hateful and depressed people. More often than not, I would argue that positive political progress actually comes from emotions that are detrimental to the host. The host would have a happier and longer life if they were not politically active. Now, when you consider this, it becomes clear a negative emotion is a very, very complicated thing. And it takes a ton of understanding, it takes a ton of analysis to see.
Now, it is true that we can say that certain emotions are more probable to be negative than others. We cannot, however, say that an emotion in and of itself is automatically negative. It depends entirely on the rationality and justification behind the emotion.
I cannot even begin to emphasize how important understanding is and how severely, severely lacking it is between most people. Most people do not constantly ask analytical questions. If you're not constantly asking analytical questions, it's very unlikely you're going to understand somebody's feelings or their thought process. What do you think? Do you think negative emotions are simple? Anybody who's sad, a bad person, and you should bash their head in with a baseball bat? Or do you agree? Do you think that the mental health industry is pretty messed up and society's pretty messed up?